Hello, everybody. I'm Josh Welsh, president of Film Independent, and welcome to today's Coffee Talk. I am so excited that Film Independent can host this conversation today between two remarkable writers, the writer and filmmaker Sandi Tan and the novelist Elif Batuman. Really looking forward to the conversation today. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to all of Film Independent's supporters for sustaining us through this critical year, going on 2 years. Whether you're a sponsor, an Art Circle member, or a member, thank you for being part of the community. If anyone is tuning in who drawn by these two incredible writers and who's not familiar with Film Independent, we are a film arts organization based here in Los Angeles to support the independent film community. We're an open access organization, so go to our website, check it out, and please join because we do lots of good stuff all year long. With that, I just want to get right into this. Please join me in welcoming, first of all, the writer and director, Sandi Tan. Hey, Sandi.
Hey.
And also joining us, the novelist, Elif Batuman. Elif.
Hi there.
Hey, great to see both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to cut out of this room in a minute, but before, I just want to tee this up by saying I love my job because I come to it as a fan of great work, whether it's writing or filmmaking, and the opportunity to have conversations with artists and creators who I admire and love their work. And today is certainly no exception to that. I am a huge fan of two novels here, which I'm going to hold up, dorkily, The Idiot by Elif, and Lurkers, the new novel by Sandi Tan.
They look good together.
They do look good.
Yeah.
I suspect many people tuning in for this conversation will have already read both of these books, but if you haven't, I urge you to go read them. And of course, I suspect everyone tuning in has already watched Sandi's amazing documentary, Shirkers, but if you haven't, you have to go watch it. I will say one thing, one thing I think you both have in common is people who like your work, in my experience, do not like your work mildly. They tend to be fervent admirers or fans of your work, and I feel the same way. With regard to Sandi, at the risk of embarrassing you, Sandi, I hope it doesn't, but Richard Brody is so passionate about Sandi as a filmmaker. In the New Yorker, he, last year I think came out with a list of top documentaries, and he picked Shirkers as one of the best documentaries of all time. And then during COVID in the last few months, he came out listing the best performances of the century so far, and Sandi herself makes his list of best performances. But I love this. She's placed on the list right between Bill Murray in Lost in Translation and Tiffany Haddish in Girls Trip, which I think really captures.
It's my correct taste level. But that was insanely generous, and that made the play worthwhile for me.
Yeah. And Elif, with The Idiot, it's a novel that, again, if people haven't read it, just go out and get it and read it. Go to your local independent bookstore and get the book and read it. You will love it. This is a book that people who have read it quote either at length or pulling individual sentences out that they just can't stop quoting. And it's smart, funny, moving, sprawling, epic, and unforgettable. So we've come together with Sandi and Elif because, excitingly, they are working together on an adaptation of The Idiot. And with that, I think I'm going to duck out of the room and turn it over to the two of you to talk about whatever you would like to talk about.
Oh, good. We can talk about cats. No.
I will. Oh, two things before I go. Please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A button down at the bottom. I will come back after 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll bring up the questions there, and we'll continue the conversation at that point. So until then, I will see you both shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I was saying to everybody, I think Elif and I, we text and we email quite a bit in the past few years, but we hate talking on the phone, like most people nowadays. And so this was like my excuse, when Josh asked me to do this, I thought it was a great excuse to kind of say hi to her and catch up. And
It's great.
kind of,
I haven't seen your face. I think we met twice, and
Yeah.
that's it. I don't think I've ever even seen you on Zoom.
before the plague. Yeah, because we just don't Zoom. It felt too weird to be Zooming when I'm working with your words every day. I'm inside your head. It'll be so weird to come outside and then see you and have things not, cohere. But
yeah, that must be really odd to be working on something where the person is like alive and like you know them. I was trying to think what that would be like, and it freaked me out, so I stopped thinking about it.
But you're doing that because you're working on the sequel to The Idiot, which most people would be very excited to hear about who are here. And then one of the thrills for me, I think we talked about it a few days ago, of working on an adaptation of something, by somebody who's living, is that I can actually tap you for answers when I'm stuck, when I'm writing a scene, say, where I have to bring them out, the characters out onto a picnic field, and then I have to give Selin something to eat, and I just want to be true to her because my whole thing is to be completely true to you, and then I would ask you,
because the line is quite blurred between me and Céline. Like sometimes I feel like I'm answering based on something that's in the. I've really enjoyed these correspondences where sometimes you'll write with a question for something, like once it was Svetlana's last name, or sometimes you were driving around Boston and you sent pictures of buildings and you were like, was this the building, or like, does this look right? Mm-hmm. And then there was that one that was like making up what she would bring to a picnic, where Svetlana had a baguette, and I was kind of like, well, why isn't Svetlana giving her the baguette? Like, so it was like a thing, because some of the things are things that I've thought about, like with people's surnames, and then some of them were things that I hadn't thought about, and some of them were things that were in the sequel. And for some of them, I was kind of going back to my idea of Céline, but then for some of them, I'm just thinking about myself, and I feel like
but that's what I'm interested in, because I wanted to make this thing kind of true to you now, as well as true to you back in 1995. Which is when this book was set. Oh. So then there's that kind of slightly meta feeling to it too. Mm-hmm. But your answer invariably when it comes to food is nuts. If you recall, it's always nuts. Yeah. And it's like, so I have her eating pistachios, and then you told me this fabulous anecdote about your aunt and you being obsessed with pistachios.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would in Turkey over the summer, there's like, you can get these untipped pistachios that are like really just fabulous. And we would just obsessively, because you'd always have jet lag too. So we would just, and we lived far apart in America. So we would come to Ankara and we would just sit all night in pistachios until we got like fingernail infections, like thumbnail infections from opening them, which is quite gross. I think
fungus was the word you used. Was it fungus?
It was fungus. It's
infections.
The nail would just break off and get red. Yeah, it was really gross.
It was really gross, and that was that was so striking that I had to put it into my voiceover for you.
Oh, great!
So it's in there. I mean, I hope it makes it into the actual film, but it's in the script. Because I just thought we had
fungus though.
Okay, yeah, infections. I think it was infection. I think, but anyway, whatever it was gross, and it was in there. And awesome. It was very much a part of, I think, being true to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. What a great gift this whole collaboration has been.
So, because one of the other things about the book and adapting it, and what drew me to want to make this into a movie, is that it doesn't seem like a natural fit for a movie. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not, it's perfect. It's a perfect book. But it's not necessarily dramatically structured for a movie. So that was kind of a challenge to me, and really a fun puzzle. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated having you to ask whenever I had things, because you do these very obscure little things in the book where you say that, Yvonne sent me an email and then it made me feel this way, but you never would reveal what was in the email. And then, so I had I could actually ask you, what was in that email, or, sometimes like some of the more obscure things that you had in the book, and I just couldn't get you to draw it out and to tell me some of the secrets. And
Oh
it
yeah,
was
I
just
remember that being really helpful. Like when we kind of made up an email together because actually the first draft, so I wrote the first draft quite close to when everything happened. It's based quite closely on my life from 1996, and I sort of turned it into a book a few years later in like 2000. And then I started editing it like just, in 16, 15.
Yeah, see, it was
2015.
over 15 years. So
Yeah, it was a really long time.
Yeah.
And then and I was on a contract to write a different book, and then I turned this book in instead, and I didn't know what the editor was going to say. And she actually had relatively few edits, but one of them was there's too much of Yvonne, like we hear too much of this guy. She's like, I get that those emails were like, would be great to receive if you, but like for us now, like just really, frankly, the less we know, the better. And I think that was true, but like that's, I mean, it's a part of, I also thought The Idiot was not necessarily adaptable. Like I had some interest in from other filmmakers, but people were like, oh, how would we do it? Would be too much voiceover. So I was really flattered and amazed when I saw Shirkers and thrilled that you thought it could be done and were so enthusiastic about it. It's super cool, but the constraints are super different because like, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit too, like your toolbox is just so different. Like in a book, you can just say that someone sent an email and show the effect and have the person thinking about it and like ruminating it, and it reminds them of something else. But like, it's not, I don't know. I've been thinking, and there's a little bit of Henry James in the sequel, and he talks about he wants the most exciting scenes in Portrait of a Lady to be when she's sitting in a chair, like realizing how just fucked she is because her life is all messed up. And like, he's like, it had to be as exciting as a pirates surprising the island, but like, you can't really do that in a movie. Like you have to, or you have to show something else. So it's just been really interesting to hear all the things, the details that you have pulled out to make.
And incidentally, Jane Campion's Portrait of a Lady is one of the best films ever made, I think.
Oh, I've never.
Yeah, it's just great. I think it's the best film. It's just amazing. But anyway, it was the puzzle of finding, teasing out these aspects, because also like watching two people typing on a computer is like the most boring thing in the world. So to find solutions to that, creative solutions to that, becomes like you actually make it more exciting as well for yourself, and maybe hopefully as a story and as a film, and finding all these visual motifs that you can do in a movie that you can't do in a book, and just finding the filmic relative of what you were trying to do in the literary way, and just being true to your vision, but using, say, there's this thing that you throw away in the book. I think we talked about this, the pink hotel that she does as a school project, where she, papers her dorm room full of pink construction paper and makes it look like this pink hotel that she remembers from a trip to Mexico with her mom when she was a younger teen. And then they asked you, what did that look like? Because you mentioned it so fleetingly in the book, but it sounded like it's something special, because it's papering your entire dorm with pink computer paper. It has to look slightly striking. So then you sent me these amazing photos, and they were like a Wes Anderson film. They were like stills from a Wes Anderson film or something. It was like, you in bright, in this, everything in your dorm room was bright pink, except for you, I think, in it. And I just thought you had to put that in the movie. I mean, I had to put it in the movie and have her, turn her dorm into this thing, which as a way of exercising something that happened to her young, in the younger days when she was trapped in this pink hotel with her mom. And then to use this pink hotel as a motif throughout the film as a state that she's trying to get out of.
It's so to me, like I feel so moved when you talk about the pink hotel, because it was really important to me at the time, and I was like obsessed with that hotel for ages. And I was actually, I loved movies when I was that age, and I thought about maybe taking a filmmaking class, and I just didn't, because it was so expensive, and the people who did it were just always in that basement. There wasn't digital yet. They were just in there cutting up film, and you never saw them again, and you had to pay all this extra money. Yeah. So, and you had to like work with other people. And I was like, no, I'm better off just, sitting at my computer. And I didn't do it. And then I don't know. And then my sensibility changed, and I kind of lost touch with all of it. But like, that was how I saw my life then. Like I saw it as a movie, and I, like just Almodovar meant so much to me at that time.
Mhm.
And then when I saw Shirkers, like I recognized so much of your sensibility, like a more visually developed version of the sensibility that I had when I was younger. And there's something about your stewardship of the Pink Hotel and you bringing it to life that it's like, I almost don't like to think about it too much because it just makes me so emotional to think that, like, if someone told me when I was 18 that like this really cool filmmaker who like you haven't even met yet, and she's like, I don't know where now, like in Singapore and England now, and she's gonna recreate the Pink Hotel and put it in a movie, like I would have completely flipped out. Like you just can't.
Well, because I saw that in your book, and I just knew that it meant something to you, but it wasn't fully drawn out. And I had to kind of tease it out of you. Like I had to bug you for those photos. I had to bug you for details. And that was kind of the fun of doing, this collaboration, which, just not showing you the actual script I'm working on, but actually just asking you for information and, like making it as true to you, maybe even truer than you expect or realize.
Or than I would do necessarily, because like I'm still embarrassed about all this stuff. Like it was embarrassing to show you those
You're too close to
pictures.
it.
They're like my 18-year-old art project. It's like,
yeah, I know, but it's amazing and poetic. And I think you would be too close to it to describe it too much, because also describing a Pink Hotel, you couldn't do it too much on the page because it wouldn't seem vivid. But on screen, you can just bring it to life, and then as a motif, and as well as the music that you mentioned that you were stuck listening to when you were trapped in the Pink Hotel, which is Albinoni's Adagio, right? And so we kind of use that as we're planning to use that as a motif through the film as well, like all the way from the organ grinder kind of awesome version of that to a disco version of that, depending on where she is and what state of mind she's in, and then slowly she begins to escape that.
At first I think that's an overplayed piece of music, and especially in movies like that. There was just that Manchester by the Sea where like he's carrying his children's corpses out of a building and was playing that, and I was like, oh, that can like never. But then I thought that like by very virtue of, it's totally something that you could hear someone play on an accordion on a street corner, or like you hear a Muzak version somewhere. Like it's so replicated. It's
and it's also funny because it's so
it's really funny. I
mean, it's so, that's why I love it, because it's so discordant.
It's automatically funny.
It is funny.
It always makes me laugh.
I love the use of kind of funereal music in a kind of a funny teenage situation. It's just funny. But anyway, so all these things that I probably saw because I was a teenage girl too, maybe still am, and I could see that you were trying to do in the book, but they weren't quite, that I would try to articulate even further in the film version, because you can do that in the film as opposed to the book. So like totally. The second half of the film version would be in Europe, especially Hungary. And that's where her world, we begin, like kind of like in that very cloistered college, milieu. And it's funny, but it's also very it's such a hothouse, and then her world starts to the outside world seeps in. It's almost as if it's like turning into Technicolor or something, and the screen is widening, and the sound design is more it permeates her life much more. She's noticing things. She's noticing that it's spring, where before she would just have her Walkman on and just be listening to whatever she listens to. And I just love what you can do with cinema that you may not be able to do in books. But also, as a writer, I love what you can do in books that you can't do.
But it's really different. I mean, in the sequel too, there's a part the end of it is in Turkey, and it briefly in the whole beginning is in Boston again. And just that feel, because a lot of it is about kind of the idea of different countries and like nationalism and what that is, and people being from different countries and what does that even mean, and like but just the extent to which you go to a different country and just everything looks different, you can't completely convey that, and like you have to find different ways, but it's like a workaround. It's like you can't, without a voiceover, you can't like interiority or like interior monologue, you have to find a workaround in film, like you show the person's expressions or something like that. But it's exactly the same thing, and you can't. I don't know, you realize too, when you read older books, like they don't always describe the things that you want to know. Like they don't tell you like the whole materiality of all of the things that would have been different if you're reading a book that was set, that's set in a different country or that was set 100 years ago. Like just that granularity of detail, like you can't see it. And that's something that just film can do so, not effortlessly because it's all obviously composed, but for the viewer, it's effortless. Like you see it all at once. And
but you get so granular, which is what I love about the Hungary sections. I mean, it's like the best kind of notebook vomit, I mean, it's like you describe all the signs outside people's houses. Beware of biting dog, and like the elderflower juices that these living history museum old ladies are making, and it's just so detailed, and it's so like when Selin starts to notice these small details, that's when her world is coming alive again. It's like her noticing the flower is the daffodils springing to life, but she has to go outside of herself, which means often outside of what she's familiar with, which is outside of Cambridge, outside of the US, into a foreign land. And then these things
so
kind of
funny.
bring her.
I hadn't talked to you about this, but in the sequel, there's a scene where she goes to, she's working for Let's Go, this guy, the student travel guide in Turkey. And she goes to Konya and she goes to the mausoleum of Rumi, and she was never into the poet Rumi. She's like, wasn't it some like lyrical, ecstatic stuff about like mystical union and wine? And like, I'm not interested in transcendental states that are beyond exceeding the limits of language, or frankly, I don't really care about anything that exceeds the limits of language. And then she gets a book of Rumi and she's like, wait, this is the person who's written only true descriptions of spring that I've ever read. And it's like spring arrives, there's a knocking on the door, commentaries on the heart arrive in 7 volumes. And she's like, that's it. That's spring. But yeah, something about just realizing spring when you go to another country just made me think of that.
That's great. And that's another funny thing about us is that I haven't actually shown you my final draft, and I haven't read your sequel.
So we've been working on this kind of same world.
Deliberate, protective of each other, kind of mutual respect move that at some point we're gonna like exchange manuscripts.
Yeah, totally.
This is so exciting.
It is. And I was always wondering, like, when I would see writers whose work was adapted, I was like, well, how did they do it? Were they like getting up in the person's grill all the time? Were they like really anxious? And then I just feel like the way that you've done it it's been wonderful. Like, I've loved to kind of have you ask questions that I can kind of like guess where you're going, but I also really like to like feel like it's your project. And I can just tell from the way that you talk about it, like you just said with the Pink Hotel, or like sometimes the way that you talk about Ivan, like you think about him differently than I do, which is like completely correct and completely like actually sounds really productive for the movie. Like it's just really nice to think that you have your own way of thinking about it, and that I get to kind of be a part of it as sort of like a fellow traveler, but like, it's a different work of art with a different sensibility. It's been really exciting so far.
And hopefully true to you in the end.
I mean, yeah, because I'm just impressed by how much that's like a concern for you, and how much you talk about that. I really appreciate that. And everything that you say sounds true. Like, even, I don't know, like with Ivan, some of the times where you were like describing like how he's like kind of cruel to her, he's sort of like jerking her around. Like, obviously that's true. And like, I wrote it that way, but like, I didn't completely phrase it that way to myself. Like there's a way, but like,
and in fact, and he's so charming that you're kind of doubting yourself half the time, which is the whole idea.
Which is how it is when you're there, when it's
exactly.
happening. Yeah.
I mean, that is the appeal of this movie for me, is that it's not a straightforward bad guy movie, because he opens up her world. He actually gets her to go out of her room and go swimming with him, go for for a walk, and then they go to Hungary, and she goes to Hungary, and it's he
and that's what other people are.
Yeah.
They like they're these doors that open up for each other, and they never go all one good place or bad place. Yeah.
Yep. That's what I love about it, and that's why I wanted to do it, because it's so not the usual black white. This is a bad guy. This is a bad gaslighting guy movie. It's so much more than that, which is, I think, closer to so many more people's experience.
Well, it's what Shirkers is too, like that sketchy guy. You guys made this beautiful movie that is on the performance between Bill Murray and Tiffany Haddish.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah.
Yeah.
But it's but yeah, so that was my attraction to your work. And can you tell us a little bit about when we can expect to see Either or, the sequel to The Idiot, which is also set over 1 year, right? It's
it's the next year. It's the very next year. I started wanting to write it as soon as I was recording the audiobook for The Idiot. So like I turned in all of the stuff like in the Galleys came out like in the summer of 2016. And then I started recording the audiobook in January 2017, like before the Trump inauguration. So like everyone was in shell shock. And then I tour during like Trump and Me Too. And then I went to Italy and there was like, they were having this like Matteo Salvini moment there. And like, it was just this like constant, just never ending. Anyway, so that was the process of, I just realized sort of from doing the promotion at this weird time that like, I understood The Idiot better. I understood like one avenue that The Idiot had been going on that I hadn't fully explored. And I was like, I haven't made myself clear. I'm just going to write another book and it's, it's just going to start that next September and the next August. So it's quite similar to The Idiot. It's the school year and the summer. And I just turned it in. Actually, my editor just accepted the revisions last week. So I should have a pub date very soon, but
okay.
I don't know.
And she's still hung up. She's still thinking about Ivan, right? The last time we talked.
Yeah, well, she's hung up about Ivan, but she doesn't actually meet him in this volume. But she does.
He does haunt her.
Sorry?
He does haunt her still.
Yeah, he haunts her, and they're still sort of emailing. And I don't know. Spoilers don't really bother me.
Don't.
I don't
spoil. But
really don't.
No. Later.
Well, okay,
you can text me. We can talk on the phone, but let's not spoil it for people, maybe.
Okay.
But I'm curious. I'm very curious.
Well, look, I won't say who it's with, but she does have sex multiple times. So it's kind of about that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's about, so like part of the two kind of questions that came up in reader responses to The Idiot that I hadn't been expecting were like, why didn't you write about sex? And also, why didn't you write about alcohol? And why didn't you write about like campus rape and stuff like that? And I was like, oh, that never even occurred to me. And then why is Sid so uninterested in politics? And I was like, she's not, where did you get that idea? And then they're like, well, when she reads the newspaper, it's all about this, elephant insemination. And I was like, oh yeah, no, she hates newspapers. But anyway, so in the sequel, it's like, you see, there's more about what she thinks about newspapers, and it's I don't know.
So you respond to reader comments with your sequel?
I did a lot in this one because also it kind of, I don't know, all this stuff happened. Like I turned in The Idiot and then like I became a lesbian. So then I got really into sex.
Wait. Okay. Rewind a little bit for the sake of our audience.
Yeah. So I turned in The Idiot and I turned it in at the end of 2016. At the beginning of 2016, I met the woman with whom I hope to spend the rest of my life, who's in the next room. And I think I hope I'm done with men. And it radically reorganized my way of thinking about myself and my past in the world. And I started reading, like I read, so a lot of the sequel is kind of a dramatization.
Kind of rewriting or rethinking.
Because it's there, like one of my editors said about and it's not like I'd never thought it, it never occurred to me until I had met a person and I was like, oh, I'm a lesbian. At least, of course, this was like something that I've been thinking about. And like, it's there in The Idiot that there's these, she and Svetlana are holding hands at the gay pride parade. And then Svetlana drops her hand and she's kind of like, well, why did you drop my hand? And there is this kind of like one of my old editors, not the editor of The Idiot, but the editor of The Possessed, or the editor of The Idiot. And he's like, isn't this a book about someone who's just really like not that into men? And which is kind of like a controversial take, but there's that too. So then I read Shulamith Firestone for the first time. I read a whole bunch of Adrienne Rich because he was, married and had 3 kids and then became this, around 1968 coincided with around the time that she turned 40, which is also what happened to me after I turned in The Idiot. I turned 40. And then I read this essay by Adrienne Rich called Compulsory Heterosexuality, which I had been thinking about in terms of when people ask me why didn't Sid and Ivan have sex in The Idiot, I started to think about just this narrative imperative that the girl has to have that like a sexual relationship with a man is the only thing that turns a woman's life into a story. I was like, why hasn't anyone written about that? And then I found this essay by Adrienne Rich, and in some way, she talks about the different forces in society that make feminism look lame, or that make relationships between women look kind of like tame or not that exciting, and like, you know, make it look like women really just need to be fucked by men, and that's what has to happen, and it's natural, and like she's just kind of describing this bill of goods and how like the greatest art in the world is reinforcing it. And I understood that that's what, like, I went to college and I was like, I'm not going to get married and have children. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to write novels. I'm going to read the greatest novels. What happens in the greatest novels? These, you know, Anna Karenina or Tatiana and Eugene Onegin, they're kind of like, their lives are sort of ruined by these, Isabel Archer in Portrait of a Lady. Their lives are consumed and ruined by men who are not really as good as them. Like, they're fine. Not Isabel's guy. He's not fine. But like Vronsky and Onegin, they're okay. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're just like not up to the level. But like, the women's sort of like investment in them becomes the subject of great literature. And I feel like I really internalized that. And some part of me, I mean, looking back, I think The Idiot was Eugene Onegin fanfic in a lot of ways, that she saw Ivan and she was like, yeah, he's this kind of like Byronic guy. And what's the point of life? If
she projects so much on him. I mean, that's the interest of the book, I think, because a lot of women have done that.
Yeah, totally. And she knows that she's better than him, but she just doesn't care. She's like, what's the, I'm going to like hang around looking like, what is this, a test? And so the is about how I sort of like depoliticized myself through my love of literature and sort of silenced my own queer and political consciousness because those things in the 90s just they were not presented to me in a way that seemed appealing.
Right. And so that's what Either Or is going to be.
Yeah, that's what Either Or is about.
Over the course of
that year,
which is 1996 to 1997.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, so she gets all these, you know, like she hears a little bit of feminism or psychoanalysis, and like she's like, okay, what's this? What's écriture féminine? And she like hears about it, and she's like, this is fucking bullshit. Like, I can't.
Okay, so I'm just like so curious about your powers of recall, because that's a long time ago. So did you have copious, like, you know?
Well, one thing I did, I remembered the books that I read then, so that I hadn't reread since that time. So I reread Either Or, I reread Nadja by Andre Breton. I found my old copies with the underlinings in it, and that got me a lot of the way to remember that stuff. And then some of it was actually material that I had written that didn't make it into The Idiot, that I'd written back then.
So notebooks, just copious, lots of notes. And
yeah, notebooks.
I know that you keep emails from like 1996 because you've sent me some of them. But that's amazing. How do you keep like all this stuff from those days? I mean, I don't know, not floppy disks, but you keep.
I just have a very small. I don't have every email from that period. I have, so this was kind of like a project that I was keeping diaries and writing about, and like I would lose parts of it as I progressed, but like there was a giant file on the computer where I was working on this novel in my 20s, and that file there were no discs at some point. Like in the aughts, there wasn't quite the cloud, but Microsoft had some. No, I was a grad student for a long time, so I had a FTP. I like uploaded a bunch of stuff to the Stanford server. And then from the Stanford server, it made it onto something called SkyDrive, which Microsoft had at some point. And then from SkyDrive, it went on to like Google Drive in the 2010.
So it's such a pure distillation. I mean, it's not a distillation, but in fact, a pure download of your brain at that point.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because most people wouldn't have access to that kind of level of accuracy, that level of detail. But you're so true to yourself back then. Do you feel
I don't have a lot going
recognition,
or do to most people?
Yeah. Do you think it's? I mean, when does it inspire you? This recognition, or makes it more distant because you're quite a different person now?
I mean, the thing that you described before, where you were like, it was like a brain download, like the sign that said barking dog, like that's totally something I wouldn't notice now. And that was in an old draft that I hadn't read in years and years because like I was embarrassed and I didn't want to think about it. And then when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that's what it's like to be alive. Then like you're looking at every sign and you think this must mean something interesting and important. And it seems really cool. It seems really funny. And there's just this like part of you that's always like looking around for some imaginary person and being like, can you right now, like, can you even believe this? And by now it's like, yeah, I believe it. It's like, it's okay. But yeah, looking at that stuff was able to make me access that stuff. I also started like psychotherapy for the first time in 2014, which I think made me able to access a lot of stuff and made me
This is
sort of
before
more,
The Idiot.
yeah, but so I resurrected The Idiot in 2015. I started therapy in 2014. I resurrected The Idiot in 2015. I did those edits for a year. I turned it in 2016 and it came out in 2017. So it was all sort of a process. Yeah. And I think like I had a lot, like most people, I had a lot of like self-hatred and embarrassment about my younger self. And therapy really helped with that and just with making it seem like, bro, like, you know, that's who you were. It's like garbage in, garbage out. You know, that's what went in, that's what was coming out. Like, it's just nature. So yeah.
And so you're still tapping into that old FTP for stuff?
I think I've probably exhausted it by now. I'm sorry, I've been talking so much. How about you?
No.
How about little Sandy? How are you in touch with her? How's that going? Do you still have
I
lots
think
of stuff?
that movie is on Netflix, and Richard Brody has seen it 100 times. But it's that's done, and there are aspects of my younger self that I'm trying to, I guess, exercise by writing about and thinking about, so that I can continue in this process of growing up. And one of them is probably, trying to get The Idiot made. And that's in progress. We're having very interesting conversations.
Super exciting.
With people. So we'll see.
So exciting.
Yeah, I just can't wait. I'm just like eager to go. But so that's what's happening. But and then you're gonna do book 3 as well. You're gonna start in book 3, you said?
Yeah, I still haven't decided. So this book was already not supposed to be book 2. It was supposed to be something else. But yeah, at some point I'm thinking that I'm gonna stop writing novels and just be like Elif and write some kind of essays. But I found that my tone when I write as myself is like quite annoying. I'm trying to make it less annoying, but I think that the tone of Celine is like a little bit less.
Yeah, I think we all, I mean, I find myself annoying too, which is why when I was making Shirkers, it was very, very difficult writing the voiceover. It was just very, very difficult. Just having to see and hear yourself is just the most troubling thing. Which is why we, try to do other things, and which is why I try to speak in other voices, for instance, like trying to channel yours.
No, but that's exactly it. Like doing the voiceover now of yourself then, like that was what I had to remove when I was like editing The Idiot. It was all like, I turned it into some kind of novel when I was 23, and there was this like 23-year-old voice in there that was like, oh, when I was 18, I was so young and stupid. And like, that was what I had to like get rid of. Yeah. But it's like, but when I try to write about like, I don't know, I've been trying to write more about like political consciousness or whatever, but if then it turns into like, I used to think like this, and I was so blind, and now I'm so smart, and I see all this stuff, and it's just I felt like I got a lot more nuance just going back to that time and being like, I was quite limited in a lot of it, but like I wasn't dumb, and I wasn't incurious, and I wasn't like not paying attention. So like what was actually going on? So from that, in that respect, I think maybe I might keep doing that for another book. I'm not sure. That might turn out to actually work better than being now. Oh, hello.
Hi, Josh.
Hey, you guys. I'm jumping back in the room. I hate to keep going. This is
no. This is. I think we've reached a natural breaking point.
Zoom is so strange. I've been like, out of the room watching you, totally engaged in the conversation. It's like I feel like I'm in the room, but then I'm obviously not. But now I am. And we have a lot of questions coming in. Some of them are general and some of them are very specific. And I want to start with some of the specific ones. Where is this one? Super specific question to Sandy. This is about Lurkers. Why does Ducky call Raymond Bryce when he gets the gun? I've been puzzling.
Oh my God, this is so specific.
It makes me feel like that's awesome. It makes me feel like I might have missed a major revelation or something. Does Mr. Z share an identity with Raymond? Do they have a relationship?
Wow, this is a deep one. I had this notion that they had known each other. I have to actually go back and look at this bit. myself because I forgot. It's been a while since I read it. But but I think no, not Mr. Z, but I think oh yeah, Mr. Z. Yes, Mr. Z did, I think, live in his house. No, or I think it was actually Bluto that might have lived in his house. Anyway, you caught me out here. I'm so like, there's so many little bits that I was trying to. Who asked this question, by the way? I'm so curious.
Anonymous.
Oh, okay. I will get you. I that's a very good question. That's a really, really good question. I'll have to go back and see. But yeah, there were all these there are all these bits I cut out from the original draft. I mean, one of the earlier drafts where, there were all these overlaps, and I think that I had Bluto living in Raymond's house before, but Mr. Z, that was just the kind of echoes, I guess. I was also going for echoes. So
okay, a question for both of you, also anonymous. Now that some time has gone by since Shirkers and The Idiot went out into the world, has your attitude, you were sort of talking about this, I feel, has your attitude towards your adolescent selves changed at all? Do you find yourself any more or less sympathetic to or understanding of that person?
You go first, Elif.
That's a lovely question. I mean, so much of the process of writing it was about coming to terms with my adolescent self. I guess the most wonderful surprise for me with The Idiot was hearing readers respond to their. I remember I was at a bookstore, and the bookstore owner, who was like a guy maybe like 10 years older than me, like in his 50s, was talking about how when he read it, he was able to stop hating his freshman year self. And like, it was such a surprising thing, especially for like a man, like he was for a tall, older man to say. I was just like kind of blown away by it. And then I've gotten a lot of like responses from younger people now who are reading it. And I'm sorry, I don't have anything to say about that, except that those interactions are really emotional for me in a way that I didn't expect, and that I'm still thinking about, and that they might have some bearing on my adolescent self, but in a way that I haven't completely formulated yet. And I'm happy to turn over to Sandi.
I think I worked out my adolescence making the film during the process of making the film.
Totally.
So so I finally grew up. Like in my 40s, I finally stopped being a teenager. I outgrew that part of my life. It was my way of saying goodbye by, getting all these things kind of bundled up in this one piece of digestible 97-minute movie that somehow seems to really speak to young kids around the world. And I keep getting these letters from young kids, I guess, and especially places like Latin America and Spanish speaking countries for some reason as well. And they always feel like I'm, how did I know to tell the story of their lives? And I just hearing that as well, like with Elif, hearing that from other people kind of like takes the burden of, of having been this teenager and having not grown up enough of me, I guess, and just
Totally.
Having other people kind of go through this with you and alongside you, and you're all holding hands and going through this together somehow in some strange way, and for the film to kind of help them alleviate their own trauma or pain or whatever has been such a great thing that I feel like it's all I'm fully done with being a teenager now.
So a slightly related question, this comes from somebody named Brandy, and it's for both of you. How do you go about writing teens and tech, emails, text, social media, etc., for screen novels without it being cringe? I think you've both done it well.
Go, Elif.
Well, thank you. Well, it was funny because I at the time that I wrote the first draft of The Idiot, it was much closer to when it happened. So the tech wasn't really that different. The internet was just changing so fast then. And it was when I was editing it, I started to look at it like so the idiot opens with her getting her first email account. So that wasn't originally the opening, that was like later in it. And I just got to that, and it was just the way that she was relating to email and not really understanding what its role was going to be in her life was like so different. And that was when I kind of realized like, oh my God, this is a historical novel. You know, this is like a book about when I was in college. Or like when Sandy's talking about like the budget for the film, like, oh, it's a shot in period. I'm like, how is that period? but it is. So I think part of the ability to write about it is that I didn't realize I was writing about it. And now when I'm in the sequel, I talk about some other developments, like there's Unix talk, which plays a role, and like that finger command, it still plays a role. But like, I still really remember what it was like to discover those things. And it feels kind of different to like, it feels kind of similar actually, like learning stuff now. Like, I feel like I'm always just learning new things, like how to find, stuff from satellite images from Google, or, to identify different places. Like, it's always some learning curve. And I just feel like that's still very easy to tap into.
The finger is something that I come back to in my adaptation of your book. I just love that it was written in 1995, and it's just our first, this is when the moment at which we were becoming us now. This is when people were discovering the internet, and you can be a different person online than you are in real life, which is now taken for granted. And that's one of the things I really wanted to capture in the movie version. It's like, this is the first contact. This is the first, like people discovering that you can be different people and what that does to fuck up your lives. And so in writing this into the movie, because showing people typing on the computer is like some of the most boring things you can do on screen ever. So we would invent different things of having her start typing, but then she's actually in a different scene, or hearing the voices being read out, the letters being read out by somebody, and also just seeing, and this is a spoiler, I guess, that's when she's typing and Ivan answers really just talking to the screen, because it's how she hears him. It's like he's talking directly at her, looking at her, in the eye, because it's that intimate, and it feels that intimate, because back in 1985, this was such a new thing to have an immediate response from somebody online. Is such a direct and almost like terrifying and intoxicating thing. And I just wanted to capture that intoxicating spirit of it. And hopefully we will do that in the movie.
It also really democratized knowledge. In the sequel, I'm writing a lot about like just her not having the internet, like she's constantly having to go to the library or like ask people to find the right person to ask for advice.
The basement, I love the detail of like how in those days, in 1985, the computers were put in the basement of the buildings because the tapping of keys was thought to be too disturbing to non-computer users.
Totally. But like a lot of her like doesn't have the same access to knowledge, and like you're more alone in the world. Or you were describing that scene where she does a cell phone, which I think where she's like stranded in the middle of nowhere, and I think that looks different now than it did back then. Like it looks scarier now, and maybe reveals how scary it actually was then, just because then it was normal. Like it was just normal to be completely alone in the world and not know anything and not be able to find anything in a book. Like she's always like running to the liquor store because that's where they have the cliff notes of Shakespeare, because like she doesn't know it's in some Shakespeare play. And yeah, that actually made me feel really grateful that things aren't like that, and like happy for people who are young now who just have so much access to knowledge. They don't have to like ask some freaking gatekeeper every time they want to know something.
Sandy, I have a question for you about your approach to The Idiot. I don't know if this would be a spoiler or not, but I'm like in Shirkers is so visually rich, where you have all different types of media. There, it's the old footage, other, right? It's a very textural film, and I'm curious, when you think about with The Idiot, are you envisioning it?
There's going to be a little bit of that, to kind of bring out, especially the stuff that's online, and as we have discussed, the pink hotel that she built in her dorm room would come back much more as the motif as well. And that's
kind of collagey when you describe the difference between the Europe part and the Boston part too, that's like almost like a different
but
material.
I don't want it to seem too much like a teenage zine as well, because I want it to be much more universal and less of a quirky little movie. So it might seem a little bit more of that inside her head, when she's in Harvard, when she's in the first part of the movie where she's very much in the world online, and partly the appeal of going to Europe with Celine when she goes out to Europe is that she's not online. There's no computers there. As if you notice that, there's no computers there. So she starts noticing the world, and it's a lot less of that collage effect of being in somebody's head.
Interesting.
So she's noticing stuff that's in the world, and the magic's all out there. The interest is all out there. People are interesting all of a sudden because you're noticing them, and you're not just reading things on a page. And that's how the world begins to intrude. Just because the world is there and she's starting to notice them.
I just have like a totally random question, which was, Sandy, did you watch Sex and the City when it came out? I was just thinking about that time and like how, I was just like, when you were talking about people typing, I just remember seeing that at the, like, it came out in the late 90s, and that the main character was a writer, and like to dramatize it, I remember she would be sitting, like, she's wearing a tutu and like one leg is up here, and like she's eating a popsicle, and she's like, sometimes I wonder.
Voiceover.
Yeah, in the tiny island of Manhattan.
Yeah, but I think it popularized voiceover for you must be extremely thankful, I guess. I mean, because that's one of the first things you learn when you go to film school. It's like no voiceover. That's the worst thing. And then you start to watch all these great TV shows or European movies, and they're filled with voiceover. So it's a matter of, I don't know, like a balance, finding a balance. Totally. But also like the voiceover kind of recedes a little bit as she goes, as she lives, as she starts to really be alive and stop.
It becomes a European movie.
Yeah. Wow.
Very specific question for Elif from someone named Chelsea. Which bridge in Cambridge is the less romantic bridge?
Oh man, I don't remember. It's the one that shoots you out at the business school.
Yep.
Sandy, did you go there?
I did.
You went on the less romantic bridge.
Remember I called you from all these locations. I sent you photos, and then you would say, no, this one, no, that one. And then we found the right ones. And yeah, that's the less romantic bridge. It's the one that's very easy to run over and you won't trip. But then you said that some kids have taken to like jumping off it or something, and then somebody else told me that. But it's so shallow. The Charles is so shallow at that point that if you're drunk and you happen to jump off it, you just kind of break your neck.
Right.
That's why it's less romantic.
That would be less romantic, yeah.
Another question from Anonymous. In both of your work, tone is so critically important and specific. Sandy, in approaching The Idiot as an adaptation, how much do you think about tone? Is the goal to preserve the tone of the novel, or to in some way make the story your own that brings a different tone with it?
It's both. It's being true to the novel tone and Elif, because I know her now, and to bring out things that she might not have been so apparent in the novel, just in talking to her, that we know it's there, but to draw out these themes, but to always keep it funny, but also but also tell the story of this girl's journey growing up. And in growing up, it's there's always going to be slightly heartbreaking stuff as well. So that's the tonal thing you try to do, this kind of strange little hopscotch between funny and sad. And one of the constant questions I have during that's asked throughout this my screenplay anyway is whether it's funny or sad, because the things, every scene can go either way, right? But I actually have Svetlana raising a hand in class and saying, wait a minute, is that supposed to be funny or sad? And
that's so great.
Explicit.
I love that.
But that's the thing about your book, is like, is it funny or sad? That seems to be the constant question. And that's my question of life itself, always. Totally. So that's the question I ask in the movie as well.
Another question for Sandy coming from Rachel. Trying to think what else rhymes with Shirkers and Lurkers. What else you're working on? Any clues?
Rachel Rosen. That must be Rachel Rosen. No. Well, Berserkers, but I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
Workers. Yeah. Maybe there's something with gherkin. I liked how Song's eating cornichons, and I wonder if gherkin can be a gherkin lurker. Lurking with the gherkin.
Wait, can I ask you? So you said pistachios do not appear in the sequel, either or.
No, there's probably some nuts in it somewhere. Because like the quarantine has been a time of increased nut anxiety because like I have to like
Well, nut consumption in your
them
home,
away.
as you
Nut
said.
consumption, yeah, it's a big
Like
deal.
you're nuts.com's top customer, you
I'm
said.
their top customer, yeah.
A question from Jesse. The Idiot is strongly influenced by Russian literature. Sandi, do you share Elif's love for Russian literature, and what is it like finding cinematic equivalents for such a wonderfully literary book?
I do not share her love. I mean, not to that extent.
Even I don't anymore.
But I do respect it, and I do pay. Well, I do pay close attention to how she comes to it. So it's we have a lot of references throughout the movie version as well. That's kind of like, you know, how she thinks about the world in terms of Russian lit is also in the movie, because that's just true to how she thinks about things. And in terms of cinematic, it's hard to say specifically, but you know, there are aspects of this that are a little bit like Call Me by Your Name, just because it ends up in Europe, and the world opens up and it's a period film, but it's also very different. So it's really hard to think of a comp, because I think it's because The Idiot is such a singular book that when you treat it, we have to find a slightly more singular, I mean, just a different way of doing it. Than it's hard to think of an exact comp. I mean, because then you start mentioning a lot of arty European movies, or movies that people may not find so appealing. But I do. Like one of my favorite movies is Joachim Trier's Reprise. You know, but you know, like you mentioned that movie and people draw a blank. So it's not a comp, but it's a very talky movie about very smart young people, and there aren't that many movies made about smart young people, unfortunately. So, you know, we might have to invent our own thing.
Another question for Sandi. Says, Sandi, in a New York Times Magazine piece, you were quoted as saying, "I'm mostly not interested in thinking and working within the Asian American sphere or addressing its issues." And you talk instead of mainstreaming Asian American interests. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that most interesting stories out there aren't going to necessarily be just Asian American stories, and I want to, you know, tell interesting stories. So that's what I mean by that. Out of context, that sounds a little aggressive, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. A question from Rona for both of you. Are you still working on casting? Would you be open to extras from this particular audience asking for a friend?
Yeah, we're working on everything. The world is just starting to open up again. So we're now kind of like actively kind of pursuing, trying to get this movie made. So it's early days yet, but yeah, we are thinking about casting, we're thinking about all kinds of things at the moment. It's early days, but exciting.
So in closing question, we always ask people at the end of these conversations, what film have you been watching lately during the pandemic? But instead, given where we just were in the conversation, is there a Russian novel each of you would recommend, or a movie? Anything that has caught your eye recently?
I mean, I think that Sandi and I are both over the Russians by now. I think we might be.
Yeah.
Sandi, do you?
I think the closest thing I can think of, well, not really close, but I mean, just of the crazy guy in his head, you know, novel that I just finished listening to actually is Philip Roth's Sabbath's Theater, that I listened to on audiobook, which is I cannot recommend highly enough, because it's such a deranged book, but it's also a deranged read, because all the voices are read by this one man. So he's doing even like the female lover, like, you know, all these like intimate scenes, bedroom scenes in this very frenzied voice, and it's just very highly entertaining. That's my closest
yeah.
Russian novel.
Is that the one with the like directing, the like she's like
Puppet theater.
masturbating and he's
Oh, yeah,
directing with
yes.
like a yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
all
that
that
sounds
kind of
intense.
stuff. Like, yeah.
Got a book to read that is going to come out in February, which is the first novel by a Uyghur writer to be translated into English, like this Muslim population in China. That so he's been disappeared since he published the novel, and he's like in a camp somewhere, and nobody knows who he is. And I was like going to read the novel anyway because it's like a good deed for like the the ethnic Turkic people. But it's really good. It's a really good book. It's called The Backstreets, and the author's name is Ferhat Tursun. It's coming out in February from Columbia University Press, and there's a production where the translator is like a postdoc at Princeton or somewhere, and he went out there to Xinjiang, or I'm not quite sure how to say it, and he met this guy, and he talks about him, and he just sounds like a complete oddball. Like he loves Camus, and he's read The Plague, like speaking of the Pink Hotel, he's read The Plague like 9,000 times, and he wrote this. It's kind of like The Stranger. It's like first person, and it's kind of like wry, funny, and also in the guy's head. And yeah, there's just an amazing part where he's like, he runs into some guy who's talking about how they have to like murder the whole minority Uyghur population. The guy's like, chop, 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 all the people from the 6 cities. And the guy's like, well, all the people in the 6 cities, that's like this million people. So like, if you were really going to chop them all, you wouldn't have time to sort them into friends or enemies. So you'd really have to chop all of them. And then the contact of the machete with the face would take this amount of time. So you multiply that by this million, and you've got several years. And like, is this guy really going to live that? Like the whole operation, rounding people up, he like estimates it's going to take 5 years. He's like, is this guy going to even live 25 years? Like, look at his face. He looks really angry, man. I don't know. He might be a goner. It's just like, there's just something really like, I don't know. I'm really loving this book.
One final question. Somebody asked, sorry, I missed the name of the film Sandy mentioned with the smart young people. Can you please?
Oh, Reprise by, a reprise by Joachim Trier, Trier. Yeah, I think that might have been a Film Independent Spirit Award nominee, or should have been. It's one of my favorite films ever.
Well, Sandy and Elif, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. It's very nice to be a fly on the wall and to jump in at the end. But thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, I think you would have to agree that Elif should try to do that theatrical monologue thing that Korea Path.
We should do a joint act. And these questions were so wonderful. Thank you to the audience and to everyone who asked questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. This is so fun.
I
will never see Elif again.
For anyone watching who hasn't gotten these novels, go get them, read them, buy them, and can't wait to see the film.